So aliens. So we're looking for aliens on the surface of Mars now. There's a rover called Perseverance, which is on an ancient river delta in what we know is an ancient lake, and it's drilling down to take samples to try and find evidence that life existed there, because there was water and all the things that we think are necessary for life. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are aliens below the surface of Mars, right? Martian microbes. We've got one called Europa Clipper. They're going to launch to Jupiter's moon Europa. That's a frozen moon, about the same size as our moon, but it's ice. The whole surface is ice. And below the surface, there's water, salt water, sodium chloride in the water. And there's more water in there than all the oceans of the Earth combined, about 3 times as much. And so that's a candidate for life. And so we're sending a spacecraft to look for life. So it's not bonkers to suggest that life may have begun somewhere else other than Earth, right? That we're looking for it in the solar system. But what is really worrying observation to me actually is that we've looked a bit for radio signals, and we look out for signs of anything out there in our galaxy, intelligence, and we don't see anything at all. And astronomers call it the Great Silence. It's kind of an ominous name, because it seems there's so many planets, 20 billion potentially Earth-like planets in the Milky Way. You think there's loads of room and loads of time, so there should be things out there, but we don't see anything. And the explanation probably, if indeed that's true, is biology. It's just, if you look at the history of life on Earth, it took nearly 4 billion years from the first cell to a civilization. 4 billion years, nearly. That's a third of the age of the universe. I think the best guess is that we're so incredibly fortunate to be here, because it's just that ask that you say, I want a planet to support an unbroken chain of life through all this violence in the universe, an unbroken chain of life for 4 billion years in order to get to something like you and me, right? Collections of atoms that can think. I think it's just really unlikely. It's terrifying and also kind of uplifting in a way, isn't it? Because it means that we're unbelievably valuable as a species and a planet. It could be we're the only island of meaning in an ocean of 400 billion suns. You go back 15 years or so, 20 years, we only knew of our solar system. So it's possible to believe all those stars in the sky were just stars we didn't know. But now we've discovered over 1,000 planets out there around stars. The remarkable thing, Kepler has been looking just at a little piece of sky to do a kind of a survey. A tiny piece of sky, and it found 6 Earth-like planets. So these are rocky planets in the right zone around the star, so the temperature's right, so there could be oceans and rivers. And if you just then extend that over the entire sky, the number now people are talking about is 20 billion Earth-like planets that could harbour life in the Milky Way. 20,000 million other Earths. This has got a name called the Fermi paradox, after the physicist Enrico Fermi, because now 20 billion Earths. The galaxy's been around for almost the entire age of the universe, 13 billion years. Why we haven't seen evidence of another civilization? I wouldn't be surprised to find that life had existed on Mars, perhaps even still may subsurface. But I would be very surprised if it were anything other than single-celled at best. But the question is, about aliens, about civilizations. We don't know. We've looked a bit. We have the SETI program. We've heard nothing. Astronomers have a term for it. They call it the Great Silence. But it is possible. The biologists I talk to tend to say, if you look at the history of life on Earth, then it seems clear that for around, let's say, 3 billion years or so after the origin of life, around 3.8 billion years ago, up to less than 1 billion years ago, it was single-celled. And complex multicellular life is a relatively recent development. So on Earth, we had about 4 billion years to go from the origin of life to a civilization. And if that is in any way typical and we don't know, then the astronomers will tell you that perhaps there aren't so many worlds that have stayed stable enough for long enough for that process to continue. We don't know. There's a key point here, that it is at least conceivable that worlds like this are very rare, in the sense that there's a very complex ecosystem, a civilization, intelligence. You can make an argument that there could be, on average, 1 per galaxy. A radio telescope called a Big Ear detected a radio signal from somewhere in the vicinity of the constellation Sagittarius. And this is the printout from that night. It was a pulse. The peak brightness was over 30 times the brightness of the background radio emission from the galaxy. That's the wavelength of light, of radio waves emitted from hydrogen atoms. So the whole sky glows at that wavelength. And back in the 1950s, radio astronomers speculated that if an alien civilization wanted to communicate with us, then they might well choose that very special, natural wavelength to send their message. So surprising was this, that when it was spotted a few days later by an astronomer called Jerry Amon, he circled that pulse, that 72-second flash of radio waves, and wrote "wow" next to it. So this has become known as the wow signal.
We've looked a bit, we've listened for radio signals from other stars, we've found nothing. We have no evidence of alien civilizations at all. That might mean we haven't looked hard enough because we haven't looked particularly hard. The galaxy is very big. But it might also mean that civilizations are rare. If you look at life on Earth, it began, we have good evidence, it was on the planet, let's say 3.8 billion years ago. So let's say it may have begun even 4 billion years ago, after the planet settled down and the oceans first formed. It took 4 billion years, let's say, to go from the origin of life to a civilization, which is about a third of the age of the universe. And if that's typical, and we don't know, then it may be that there are very few solar systems and planets and stars that are stable enough for that long to allow for evolution to do its work and for the single-celled things to go to multicellular creatures and plants and make an oxygen atmosphere and then make a civilization. Probability favours the existence of aliens. The universe is so big, 1 with 22 noughts after its stars in the observable universe. We now know that most of those have planetary systems. Certainly if you look in the Milky Way, which we can do in our own galaxy, basically everywhere we look we find planets around the stars. So let's say that most of them have solar systems. So it is inconceivable that there will not be life and I think civilizations out there amongst the stars. But the question becomes, first of all, what form does that life take? So if civilizations exist, again, the distances are important. If you think about our galaxy, it's let's say 100,000 light years across or so. That means that it would take a radio signal 100,000 years to go from one end to the other. So it would be a very slow conversation. I mean, even our nearest star, Alpha Centauri, the nearest star system with planets around it, we think, is 4 light years away or so. So that means a conversation would take 8 years. So if you said hello, you'd have to wait for 8 years before they said hello back. And that's our nearest star system. So the distances tend to make conversation difficult.
Then we didn't know of any planets beyond our solar system because we hadn't detected them. So even if we thought, well, we can't be special, we didn't know. And then in the early 1990s, we started being able to detect planets. And now we've detected well over 3,000. We've got missions up there like the Kepler telescope that are just trying to detect planets. So thousands of them. So now the statement is that pretty much every star in the sky will have planets around it, which is remarkable. If you go out, it's a clear night, you go out and look at stars, you can imagine that there will be solar systems around every one. So that allows us to start thinking how many potentially Earth-like planets might there be in the Milky Way galaxy? And the answer is about 20 billion. What you mean there is a rocky planet, the right distance from its star, possibly, if everything's right, to have liquid water on the surface and so on. In a nice distance from the star, perhaps 1 in 10 stars. We talk about a thing called the habitable zone. Now, in the solar system, there are 3 planets in the habitable zone. There's Venus, Mars and Earth. Venus is close to the sun, Mars further away. All of those planets, though, we think had water on the surface. So they all could have been habitable in that sense. And still, we're looking for life on Mars to this day. The flip side of this is there are loads of planets out there. And there's been loads of time. This has got a name, actually. It's called the Fermi paradox, after someone called Enrico Fermi, a great Italian physicist, who asked this very simple question, which is, where are they? Because given the number of planets, given the number of stars, and given the amount of time in this galaxy for complex life to emerge, it seems as if at least a few civilizations should have become a spacefaring civilization. So part of the evidence, part of the great conundrum here is that, so on the one side, yes, we've got the history of life on Earth, which says that we took a long time to emerge. And so it looked quite like an unlikely process. On the other side, you've got all this real estate, and you have this. So if you think about where we could go, what could we become as a civilization? So already we are becoming a spacefaring civilization now very quickly. So give us 1,000 years. We don't destroy ourselves or do anything stupid. I'm sure we're going to be on Mars, we're going to be on the moon, we're going to be thinking, perhaps taking our first steps out to the stars. Give us 1,000,000 years, 1 million from now. If we survive, we should become a spacefaring civilization. Now, 1 million years, the galaxy has been around for the age of the universe, 12, 13 billion years. So it only takes a few civilizations to have evolved a bit ahead of us. 1 million years. Well, let's say 1 billion years. 1 billion years, it's still nothing. You get some civilizations that evolved 1 billion years before us. Why can't we see them? So then people start saying, well, maybe there's a finite life that all civilizations have. Maybe they destroy themselves. Maybe they don't become spacefaring civilization.